Donnie Darko is one of the most unique films that's ever been made.
I've been watching you.
In each video in this series, I want to take a few scenes from the film and break them down from a writing and directing standpoint and analyze the absolutely brilliant direction of writer and director Richard Kelly. If you're new here, I'm Jordan, and welcome back to my channel. I'm a narrative writer, director, and producer, and have been working in LA for the last 10 years. This channel is all about filmmaking techniques, the philosophy of art, creative and technical workflows, and what filmmaking can teach us about life. Donnie Darko is my favorite film of all time, and one that I consider to be an absolute masterpiece. It's also the film that got me into filmmaking. And I'll also reveal at the end why this is one of the most unique films that's ever been made. So let's get into it. This is the second in a series of videos where we dissect various scenes from the director's cut of Donnie Darko that illustrate the genius of Richard Kelly's writing and directing prowess, and why this is the most unique film that's ever been made. So with that set up, let's dive into the scenes. Destruction is a form of creation.
Donnie Darko, perhaps with your recent brush with mass destruction, you can give us your opinion.
There's a medium shot of Drew Barrymore, and it's almost angled as if it's from Donnie's POV, from his perspective, so I think that's a very smart choice of angle. And then there's a reverse angle on Donnie, that's also a medium shot.
They say it right when they flood the house and they tear it to shreds, that
But toward the end of his line of dialogue, we slowly start to push in, but it's delayed. So we wait quite a bit until he starts to make his final point. I think that's also to emphasize that specific point of the dialogue. But what he says here that I think is such a major tie into a major theme of the movie, when he talks about destruction as a form of creation, I think that very much ties into our overall thematic plot. But I like that it's very simply hinted at here and very simply summed up. And I really like films that in every scene can hint at what the overall theme is, or at least give a subtle nod to it.
destruction is a form of creation, so the fact that they burn the money is ironic.
So it just feels much more unified, I think, when a movie does that. And here, I think it's done so well, where it's in discussion of a specific piece of literature by Graham Greene. And I also think that novel has a lot of different ties into the overall story as well.
They just want to see what happens when they tear the world apart.
So I think all the literature references that Drew Barrymore's character has the class read also have a lot of ties to the symbolism of the plot.
I want to change things.
And when they discuss the other novel, Watershed Down, which is about talking bunny rabbits, I think it's very clear that you also see the tie to the symbolism of Frank, the bunny rabbit who talks to Donnie. But the choices here are absolutely fantastic. I really want to highlight not only Kelly's choices of directing and the writing, but Drew's ownership of this character and the costume designer, the hair and makeup. I really like what they did with Drew's hair, and she really feels and looks like an English teacher. I just believe it. It's so realistic to me and just feels like somebody I would see actually teaching a classroom.
His 15th year crystallized with the pain of puberty.
The way Drew played this character is such that she's not afraid to have a little fun with her class, almost wants to show her class that she can be cool too. She's the cool English teacher who isn't afraid to be a little sarcastic and show personality.
Joni, if you had actually read the short story, which at a whopping 13 pages would have kept you up all night.
And she's very different than a lot of the other rigid teachers that we come to meet later in the film. And so it's very clear that she doesn't really fit in with a lot of the other personalities who work in this school. It also makes her human and shows how much passion she has for the literature and the lessons that she teaches to the class. And I think you really see with the way that she asks Donnie and the way that she approaches him, she seems to know that there's something different about Donnie as well. And so I think it goes to that old adage of it takes one to know one. So I think Drew's character Karen, who's an outsider in this school environment, also sees Donnie as an outsider, as a student in this environment as well. And she's able to recognize and can't quite put her finger on it, but realizes something is different about him. And a lot of the way she looks at him throughout this film or talks about him when he's not around, it's very clear that she's also tapped into something else that's going on. So I think it shows that she has very astute powers of observation, and so much of this performance is what she doesn't say, but what you see her thinking about in her head. And she's very calculated in what she ends up saying externally and what she keeps to herself. So I like that. There's a lot of depth here. I also think it's absolutely amazing the way that she has Gretchen pick the boy she thinks is cutest to sit next to.
Where do I sit? Sit next to the boy you think is the cutest. Quiet.
I doubt that would probably ever fly in a classroom in today, but I am sure that in the 80s, that probably is something that would have flown so much easier.
Better choose.
But I like that. I think it's a remnant of times past and is harmless. And I also like that it does bring Donnie and Gretchen closer. There's also something different that Gretchen sees in Donnie as well. So I think this scene very much shows that the people in the world are noticing Donnie. And while not everybody appreciates him and some might think he's weird, there are people that see him and appreciate him for who he is. The parent-teacher conference scene. I think this is another really great scene that showcases just the school culture and the emphasis of the parent-teacher association, especially within a school district. There's such a wide range of attitudes showcased here, and we really get to know the character of Kitty on a much deeper level.
I want to know why this filth is being taught to our children.
And she is very much that character, that annoying person who's on the PTA that we all know is annoying and we've all had to deal with at some point or another. And I think she very much is the proxy of that annoying person who knows better than everyone else around us, is self-righteous, she has all the answers, she has this agenda of conservative values and not pushing the envelope, and is complaining that this book that's being taught by Drew Barrymore in the English class is pornographic and is showing people how to destroy and corrupting our youth. And so I think it's very clear that she has this stance, and it's very funny that the principal is very clearly established as a doormat here. He doesn't really know how to control her.
Kitty, I would appreciate if you would wait.
Dr. Cole.
So she just sort of does whatever she wants and sort of speaks for everybody, or thinks she does.
Therefore, I am the only person here who transcends the parent-teacher bridge.
As we're juxtaposing the PTA conference, we're also with Donnie, and we're seeing him again having a dialogue with Frank through the mirror.
Don't worry. You got away with it.
I think this is especially great of a staging because he's looking in the mirror. Of course, there's a symbolism of duality and your reflection or your shadow in the mirror, looking at yourself. And so I think there very much is this metaphor here going on of, am I looking at myself or am I Frank? Am I a component of Frank? I think Kelly's really playing around with this here. And we're also establishing further the dynamic of Frank and Donnie and what is the true nature of their relationship and why.
I have in my hand Graham Greene's The Destructors.
Some nice cross-cutting here where Donnie asks, how do you do that? And
You do that.
And then we cut to Kitty saying,
And how do they do this? They flood the house by breaking through a water main.
I like that they repeat the line there. I think it just makes for a nice smooth transition. I also think there's a nice thread here where Kitty points out that they destroy the house through a water main and Donnie busts the water main of the school with the axe. I think what Kelly's saying here is that if you pay close enough attention, literature and art really do transcend the confines of the page or the screen.
Destroy an elderly man's house from inside out.
Two really great performance moments here. So Mary McDonnell, who plays Rose, which is the mother of Donnie, is sitting with the husband. I really love her character in this movie. Her performance is beautifully done. We establish she's clearly a part of the PTA. She has 3 kids at the school, but she has a very different view on parenting and what it should look like than Kitty here. So I think we very much see the diametrically opposed viewpoints, and we do establish that Donnie's mother very much is somebody who is on the right side of history. We further endear to Rose here, Donnie's mother, and she really asks,
Excuse me. What is the real issue here? The PTA doesn't ban books.
what is going on here? This isn't what we do. Why are we gathered here? And of course we have this great moment where Noah Wyle, the science teacher, sitting next to Drew Barrymore, he has this great moment where he nods in approval of what Rose just said.
The PT.
I think that's just such a fun moment that shows where the battle lines are drawn. We have the cool side and then we have the more extreme side, which I think is also very symbolic of the political spectrum in our country as well. And there's also a lot of ties and references to American politics and the election in 1988 with Michael Dukakis and George Bush Sr. So I think it's very smart that this is another example of how we have these battle lines drawn, we have these warring parties, and I think you see it in so many places, not just in the political arena, but also in the school arena and the sports arena. Part of our culture to have such opposing views of the way things should be. One of the metaphors I really draw for this scene, but also the different characters in this film, is is that somebody like Kitty is an extremist on a certain ideological view.
That pornography is being taught in our curriculum.
And then you have more of the moderate view, and they're in opposition with each other having this battle.
It's meant to be ironic.
Excuse me, you need to go back to grad school.
And I think that's a big analog to just our country, but especially what's been happening the last few years and how divided we are. This is a really good example of that, just in a smaller microcosm. That always has happened throughout history. The other thing this scene really enforces is that Karen's character really doesn't fit in with some of the people who are high up the chain on this PTA board. People like Kitty and the principal, they have their own set of ideas and they help each other out. They're friends and they all are sort of in each other's back pocket. And then you have the people who are actually trying to provide value and a real education, especially in the English classroom, who are pushed out because it's seen as too progressive and too scary or corrupting the youth. So I think this is a great commentary on school culture and especially censorship culture in America. The search for God.
I got out of the car and I walked over to see if she was okay.
A nice lead into another therapist scene where we have Jena Malone's character and Donnie bouncing on a trampoline. I really like this pre-lap. Pre-lap is just when you hear the audio of the next scene happen before we actually show the visuals of that scene. And I think it's a really nice way to bring us in. And the music is such a nice choice of score for this point in time in the film. This is roughly an hour into the movie, and I think it's a midpoint type of music that really helps guide us, makes things feel like we're kind of on an upward trajectory, match your emotional peaks and valleys structurally as well.
And she leaned over and whispered in my ear.
We see Donnie getting more and more excited. He cuts off the therapist once.
What did she say?
I mean, I think Frank wants me to go talk to her, because
we're starting to see Donnie really tap into this relationship with Frank. And I think this scene with therapist is a perfect one that precedes the scene where the therapist is talking to his parents, where she's starting to get a little bit more concerned about him because of how convinced he is of Frank and his relationship with Frank and all of the different things he's starting to piece together. From the outside, it almost sounds like a madman talking.
The last time I saw him, he asked me if I knew about time travel, and she wrote a book about it, so they can't be like a coincidence, right?
But we know that this is all actually part of the greater plan that actually is true. So I like that we see Donnie start to amplify in his conversation with a therapist here. I also really enjoy that in the scene earlier in the film where Grandma Death or Roberta Sparrow whispers into Donnie's ear. We don't hear what she says on camera, so I'm really, really appreciative that he explains what she actually said on camera, since sometimes in movies when they do that and they don't pay it off, it just annoys me. So
Donnie, what did Roberta Sparrow say to you?
She said that every living creature on Earth dies alone.
really nice use of very simple, slow push-ins on each character's angle. We're playing this in medium close-ups on each character, and they're clean shots. They're not dirty shots where you see a corner of the character's shoulder in the frame. Personally, I really don't like those shots, so...
How did that make you feel?
I really like in coverage when you just have a clean angle, mainly because you can fill out your frame with more production design, more set dressing, more art department, or we just get to see the person's face uninhibited.
It reminded me of my dog, Callie.
We're doing coverage where we're slowly pushing in on each character. And again, this just makes us feel like the energy of the scene, of the conversation, is escalating in dramatic tension.
She died when I was 8, and she crawled underneath the porch.
This always makes us as an audience member want to lean a little closer to really hear what's going on and pay further attention.
To die.
To be alone.
Because we almost feel like at the end of the conversation, there's a pot of gold or some secret we're about to be let in on. So in my opinion, a great dialogue scene almost gives you the promise of a great secret that you're just about to hear, even if it doesn't give it to you.
Do you feel alone right now?
The first time in the whole sequence, we have a wide shot. This is really great because in a way, it almost recenters us and makes it feel like we're back on common ground or a neutral space. Sometimes when you start getting into the coverage, you start getting a more subjective take. It almost feels more like an intense battle. Whereas when we go back to a wide shot, in my mind, as a director, that's a time I would almost stage it as like, okay, we're back on common ground. This is almost like a neutral outside objective. Whereas when we're doing coverage that's closer, to me, me, it feels like we're in the conversation. We almost are participating. Further out, we almost feel like we're watching a tableau, a piece of art. We're almost outside the frame. We're just watching, not participating, if that makes sense.
I mean, I'd like to believe I'm not, but I just...
This is probably my favorite Jake Gyllenhaal monologue in the film. I think it's probably one of the times he gets the most chance to really just act and showcase what he can do. So I think he delivers it super well.
I could spend my whole life debating it over and over again, weighing the pros and cons, and in the end, I still wouldn't have any proof.
I know I've been talking about a lot of the other actors who are so great in this movie, and part of it's Jake is so young. It's one of his first movies, but I think he handles this monologue super well.
I just don't debate it anymore. It's absurd.
One of the things that I think is such an interesting conversational jump here in the writing. So what's interesting to me is the leap that she makes logically when she asks him,
The search for God is absurd?
and I'm just really curious. I'd love to talk to Richard Kelly. What made you leap to that point? Because it's such an escalation of talking about Donnie and his loneliness. I think what she's getting at, if I had to speculate, is that if we're truly alone, there's no God, there's nothing, even if we are alone, if you believe in religion. If you're alone and you believe in religion, of course, there's still the God there looking down on you, so you're never truly alone. But if you're not a believer, then you would feel truly alone. So I think what she's kind of probing at here is, where do you stand on that? Is Donnie religious? Does he believe in God? Does he believe in the presence of God? I think that's what she's getting at with that question, which does make sense. Are you truly alone if you believe in God, or would you not be? I mean, my answer would be you wouldn't be, because there's always somebody looking down on you. But that's, I don't know. I'm not sure. Let me know what you think about that in the comments below. And then his response is one of the most profound
It is if everyone dies alone.
lines in any movie I've still ever seen to date. I remember when I heard that line, even in high school, I went, that is profound. That's just a profound line. I don't know how Kelly thought of that. I bring this scene up to discuss because that idea of what he's saying is just so thought-provoking. It forces you to stop and think about it because it's such a large otherworldly concept. Even if there is a God, it's absurd if we all die alone anyway. I really like that all these are tied in. It doesn't really give you a definitive answer. It lets you ponder it and think about it. And I'm still thinking about it. Every time I hear the conversation, it makes me stop and think about, is that what they mean? And again, doesn't even mean that I'll ever fully understand it, but I like that it keeps me guessing. It really makes me think deeply to try to solve it and put it together. And in some ways, good dialogue is almost like a puzzle. Parent therapy scene.
Thank you for seeing us at such late notice.
Right off the bat, it says a lot about both of Donnie's parents that they were both willing to schedule a last-minute visit to see his therapist just because they really care about him. And I think this really shows what kind of parents they are, especially coming from the mother's side. You can tell that it was probably the mother Rose's idea to schedule this session, and hence why I think she's leading in. She's the one doing the talking at the start of the scene. She's almost the spokesperson for both parents.
We both felt that it was time for us to come in and discuss
What I think is going on with your son.
Already, I really like that Katharine Ross, which, by the way, Katharine Ross plays the daughter of Mrs. Robinson in The Graduate with Dustin Hoffman. So one other thing to point out is the therapist is so astute that she is able to essentially finish Rose's statement without Rose having to say the entire statement herself. And what that says to me is that she can see how painful it is for Rose to vocalize the problems that she's having with Donnie and why it's not getting better. And she knows firsthand how difficult it is to see that, especially probably with some of her other clients that also have children. But I really like that she's coming in and just almost reassuring the parents right away by finishing the statement saying, yes, I understand exactly what you're talking about, and let's go into it.
for insulting his gym teacher.
Well, I'm not really sure that's a good example, Rosa. I think he had just cause to.
Some really nice subtle dynamics right here between Rose and Donnie's father. I like that we're still establishing the consistent pattern that the father thought it was actually pretty cool that Donnie stood up for himself and told Kitty to shove that program up her, you know what. It's consistent with the way he reacts earlier when they first walk out of the principal's office when Donnie gets suspended. Some beautiful work from Mary McDonnell where she takes her glasses off almost to signify physically that I think that's a really great acting choice choice because it feels subtle, but also realistic and also definitive at the same time without being overacting or a major gesture. It just feels like a great moment that would actually happen in a situation like that in the room. And I like how the dad is still somewhat defending Donnie's action to tell off Kitty, but deep down Rose knows this isn't really the right example to set for their children, even if she does agree, because she also doesn't love Kitty. And so I think it's really fun to see how sometimes mothers and fathers can differ on subtle things like this on how to parent. In comparison to the parent-teacher conference scene where there is a whole section of dialogue happening between the parent-teacher conference, we're cutting back to Donnie at home in his bathroom talking to Frank. And what I like is we go back to that same type of cutting rhythm where we show Donnie grabbing a knife and he's right about to go back up to the bathroom to again talk to Frank.
Donnie's aggressive behavior.
So I really like that as the therapist is talking about these daylight hallucinations, we're about to show you one that's happening at the exact same time, albeit in just a different space.
Increased detachment from reality.
This is a great use of editing and really showcases the power of what editing can do for the cinematic language. I like that the therapist tries one tactic to explain what's happening with Donnie. Both of the parents don't follow.
To cope with the forces in the world that he perceives to be threatening.
And I really like that there's this pregnant pause. She patiently takes another route to try to explain it a little more clearly to them by bringing up Frank.
Has he ever told you about his friend Frank?
To show the severity of the problem, since in their eyes, Frank is not somebody who actually exists, but we as the audience, we know better.
Frank?
Yes, the giant bunny rabbit.
What?
And now the conversation progresses. We really start to establish that this might be even more severe than we thought. I think this is also a really smartly written scene because as we're cutting back and forth with Donnie
is experiencing what is commonly called a daylight hallucination.
Seeming to even be more physically aggressive with Frank. He has a knife in his hand. He's pounding the mirror to try to potentially attack Frank. I think it just shows that as he's getting more aggressive with his physicality, the conversation is also insinuating that his hallucinations, his condition is also getting more aggressive. And I think it's also setting us up as an audience to think, wow, Donnie is really struggling and his condition is escalating. What else is he going to be capable of, especially when Frank is talking to him and telling him what to do?
I don't recall him ever having mentioned a rabbit.
This is a great line from Rose, who you can tell is doing her best to try to keep it together. You can almost hear her repeating this to herself inside her head. I think this is really her trying to come to grips with what is happening with Donnie. Some nice visual effects here for when they made this in 99/2001 when it came out. Also some nice sound design choices with the knife and the blade sharpening. If you look at the reactions of Donnie's parents, their jaws are almost on the floor. I mean, that's almost the way that I would write it into a script if I was to showcase their performances here. But I love it because they are speechless. What else would you say to this if you heard this as a parent and this was described by a therapist for your child? I'd probably have the exact same reaction. I really like that it feels so realistic that they're taking this information in, but trying their best to also keep their composure because they're in a professional setting. There is a red herring planted here on purpose. The therapist said,
This is a common occurrence among paranoid schizophrenics.
She says these daylight hallucinations are often associated with paranoid schizophrenics, but notice how she didn't say Donnie is a paranoid schizophrenic. There's a big distinction there, and the reason that that's important is that I think this is supposed to make you think, for sure, Donnie is a paranoid schizophrenic. We know he's been taking medication. He's seeing Frank. We're all led to believe that he does have this. But as we learn later, spoiler, the therapist is actually giving Donnie placebo pills. pills. So what we really learn is that he actually wasn't taking any medication at all. Frank is actually real, especially when the prophecy plays out and Donnie does take his life to save the world. He was solely just the living receiver, according to the Book of Time Travel from Grandma Death. So this all really just plays into the master plan of the way that the film is designed, which is again why I think the film is so brilliantly laid out and so complex, especially when you really analyze it.
What can we do?
It's heartbreaking to watch this scene and then rewatch it and see in real time how Donnie's parents, especially Rose, their face continues to get more and more distraught as they're trying, especially Rose, Mary McDonnell. It does such a beautiful job of conveying this heartbreak, but trying to stay strong, especially in public.
I would like to do more hypnotherapy.
I wish we could have a scene where we see her right after this and the way that she handles the situation with her husband and what they talk about. I'm sure that she totally breaks down. But what I love is you could see that this is probably what's going to happen after. She's trying her best to keep it together. This is where we're finally starting to see her exterior start to crack. Tears are starting to form in her eyes. She just can't keep it together anymore, and it's completely understandable as to why. This is a heartbreaking situation. Some nice cross-cutting here, since as the therapist talks about increasing the medication, we're seeing the most aggressive form of Donnie that we've ever seen, where he's stabbing the mirror.
And increase his medication.
So all the context clues and all the filmmaking devices are leading us to believe Donnie is really starting to go off the handle, including his parents.
Whatever will help him, really, is... That's why we're here.
Just absolutely beautifully delivered line from Mary McDonnell. I really, really, really am touched by her performance. It makes me emotional seeing her just feeling this intense heartbreak of the last thing that you probably want to hear as a parent is that your kid needs more medication to fix the problem that's already not getting better.
We just would like him to experience some relief.
This is such a beautifully conveyed scene on her part, just showcasing how much this is tearing her apart inside and how much she really does love Donnie.
So, if you think that more medication will do that?
This really is showcasing her interior strength as well, and that she is keeping it together. We see that she's still going to figure this out, and she's determined to do whatever she needs to make sure that Donnie's okay.
Then I think we should give it a try.
I really, really appreciate that Richard Kelly let Mary McDonnell just shine in this scene. This is Mary McDonnell's scene. In a way, this is Mary McDonnell's movie. So kudos, Mary McDonnell. Mary McDonnell's performance as Rose Darko is absolutely beautiful. I think it's an Oscar-worthy performance, to be honest. She just shows such an incredible range of compassion and emotion and sensitivity and love for her children, especially Donnie, who is seen in the eyes of society as crazy or labeled that way.
How's it feel to have a wacko for a son?
But I just love the way that she treats him with so much care. She never writes him off.
It feels wonderful.
And I also love the way that she stands up for her values and challenges people like Kitty. And we see that she's a mother who really understands what's best for her family, for her kids, and is just so empathetic and beautiful. Mary McDonnell, I want to give you your absolute props for this performance as Rose. It's one of the most underrated performances I've ever seen. You're one of the most underrated actors, so beautiful performance. I just want to say that at some point in the series. That concludes the second part of why there will never be a film like Donnie Darko ever again. I want to hear from you. Comment below your favorite memories of the first time you watched Donnie Darko, or what the film's symbolism means to you. And for more movie breakdowns, you can check out more of my videos like this series I did on The Ring, which you can find here. So give it a watch. And stay tuned for next week, where we continue to break down different scenes from the film Donnie Darko, and I'll continue to make the case as to why this is one of the most unique films that's ever been made. So I will definitely see you then.